Hey, what's up everyone? Today we're going to do a video on transferring stuff out of GarageBand, and I'm going to be transferring it into Pro Tools, but really once you get it transferred out of GarageBand, you could transfer it into any DAW you want. So we'll talk about getting it into Pro Tools, but also along the way, you'll see things that I think will help you get it wherever you're going. So yeah, so what I've got right here is a session in GarageBand that has been sent to me, and before I do any mixing, I want to move it to my DAW of choice. And so there's a few checklist things to do before getting it out of GarageBand that we'll go through. And it's, there's like no way in GarageBand to mass export all your tracks like there are in other DAWs like Logic and Pro Tools. I'm sure, Reaper and all the, all these various more fleshed out ones have just kind of batch processes. But GarageBand, being simple, doesn't give you that kind of tool. So it's not that hard to do, but it is a one by one, per track step kind of thing. But once you get the first one set up, then it just kind of rolls on through. So before we do it, there's one settings thing I would mention, which is under advanced. I think it defaults to 24-bit anyway, and whatever you've been sent probably has whatever bit definition they have anyway. But I like to make sure 24-bit is on. And I don't have this export projects at full volume on. I don't think it's really that bad if you have it on. It'll kind of just auto normalize, as it says. And if there are quieter tracks, like you can see down here in this session, there's one that's pretty quiet. So I know that I can clip gain it up when I get over to Pro Tools just fine, no problem. But if you felt like that was an annoying thing, you could leave auto normalize on. It might help. I don't know. Whenever I do transfer stuff out of another DAW, I'll leave this session here. So once I get over to Pro Tools and start working, if there's anything I needed to rebounce, I could just go back and redo it with whatever setting changed. So, keep your session that you're transferring out of. Don't just trash it as soon as you're done. At least leave it around for a little while, if not permanently in a subfolder or something. But that aside, now getting into the GarageBand tracks themselves, the main prep things I like to do are I like to make sure that the master volume is set at 0, which it is already, but option click will get you defaulted to 0 if it's not. And then same thing with all of the tracks themselves. I like to just go through and option click them to 0 so that they will be, basically they're standard default level. And then there aren't any pans going on here anyway, but I will also option click through all of the pans. And so these are all panned center now. That's cool. We're almost ready to start exporting our tracks. The only other thing I will look at and consider before I bounce out is you can see down at the bottom, there are controls that in this case, nothing's really going on anyway, but there might be some mix stuff in play from whoever you got this from. Like they might have reverb going on. They might have tried EQing things to try to get them to sound good and done compressor stuff. And, they might have tried to make some crazy mix and then gave up and said, you know what, we're going to reach out to so-and-so and send it to them to do a mix. So there might be crazy stuff happening that you would want to turn off the EQ or change it to be more normal or take down the reverb. But, also sometimes what they might have going on is cool, and it might be, they might have EQ'd a little bit on a track that has what they're used to hearing. It's just not quite, right overall. So depending, I'll leave some of that stuff on if it's not an overt amount and it's not going to get in the way of me working with it when I get into mix. But again, that's your call. And as I said before too, about the normalization, you can come back and do another bounce totally dry if you do end up leaving some of this stuff on your first time. But just be aware of it and make a choice related to your awareness. And now we're ready to bounce out. And the first thing we want to do is solo our first track and go up here to share. And we're going to export song to disk. And so the bounce out procedure for making stems with GarageBand is just you're making a quick little mix of each track. And so we want to make a new folder, call it export for the session that we're doing here, create that, and then you'll see that it defaults to save as with the name of the project. That would be presumably like a song bounce, but we're just going to say organ And since I can see that there's multiple organs here, we're going to call this organ 1. It's a WAV file. That's good for me. Uncompressed 24-bit. Definitely want to go 24-bit to keep it as high quality as possible. And I don't need to worry about exporting this cycle area because I'm just exporting this as a session, so it'll run the whole length of the little session here. But if you needed to, you could set some cycle stuff up and further, specify an area. But we're going to go ahead and say export organ 1. And that's it. That's organ 1 sim is on its way. Export song to disk again with the next one soloed and call it organ 2. And you can see from here, it pretty much just rolls on through. So maybe I'll fast forward through this rest of this so you don't have to just watch a bunch of tracks bounce, but that's the first stage completed. And there we are, we're done. And even when I close this, I am going to say don't save, because if I want to come back to this and I do want to rebound something with whatever full original EQ and reverb stuff was going on, it'll open it back up the way they sent it to me. So again, that's your call, but I don't really need to save anything that I just did. We're all done and bounced out. So I'm going to close it. I'm going to say don't save. Okay, the next step is an optional one. This is for the fact that when GarageBand exports stems, they're really mix downs. And so even though they're all mono tracks, they are exported as stereo files. And you can just roll with that. That's fine. But there is a program, a handy program I've found called Stereo Monoizer that I think at the time of this video is like $50. It's been worth it to me. And it'll take your stereo mono tracks, and as the name suggests, it'll then bounce out a actual mono file of them. So this is something you don't need to do, but it's a cool option to know about. And I will still talk you through, what to do if you don't have this or don't want to, use this paid step. But it's handy. And the way it works is I can just take our WAV files that we just made and it'll analyze them. And you can see they are really 2 mono channels. And what it's going to do is just convert, one of those channels, and the result is going to be a mono file. And so what do I want to do here? I want to just make a new folder to put them in called mono. And we just say process, and boom, it went through and hit all of our stereo mono files and made them actual mono files. And as mentioned, I want to talk about if you don't do this step, because it's not a big deal. This is just something I like. It's easy for workflow, but let's trash the mono field recording, and I'll pull the stereo field recording in to our mono folder because I'm going to import from this, and I'll show you what to do with that as well when we get there. So that's the optional middle step, the stereo monoizer. Okay, and that brings us to the final stage here, which is bringing this into Pro Tools. And GarageBand, I'm pretty sure is just always 44.1 sample rate. So we can leave that 44.1. There's no reason to fake upsample. The bit depth, we exported at 24-bit. So we're going to leave that. And WAV is good. And we don't need interleaved because this is a multi-track session from files we just made mono. So other than that, we're going to title it. And we're going to get ready to import. And with Pro Tools, I usually do the shortcut, but let's go ahead and go down on the menu here to import audio, which is Command-Shift-I. And we will see here in our folder, ready to go, is our mono audio, with the exception of the field recording. You can even see from the file size, that one I still have as stereo. We want to make sure to copy in, because in Pro Tools, if you just add it, it'll reference where you are adding it from. If you copy, it'll actually copy it into your audio files folder for this session. Very helpful if you're going to move around, especially to other studios or other rigs. You don't want to get there and have your audio not actually be there, which happens more often than you'd think. And then we're going to make new tracks out of all these. And the location selection is at the top of the timeline anyway, so that's fine. And we're going to go ahead and import, and boom. I mean, we're done now. This is, for all intents and purposes, transferred to Pro Tools. And since we did stereo monoizer, everything is already in nice, easy mono files, except for the field recording, which I left as stereo so that I could show you if you had brought them all in, if you didn't have stereo monoizer. Now, there's a couple of options. I mean, you could just work with it as is. And if you needed to pan it to the left, just pan your other side left too, and it's going to pan left. It's kind of annoying. I don't really like working this way. I'd prefer to actually go mono still because it is mono. And so what I will do is right click on the track where you get these options, and you will see down here, split into mono. And I will split it into 2 mono files and then just delete one of them because I don't need them both, and delete the original stereo file, and then go ahead and delete the tracks. And you're left with just a mono region. And the only other thing to do with that is make sure to pan it back to the center to start with and rename it just to field recording because it's no longer just the right side. It's a mono track. That is our field recording. And if you'd done that with all your stems, like if they're all stereo, you just go through each one and do that same workflow thing. So that's all there is to it. Now this session is ready for me to get to work on. And as mentioned, if you were going to another DAW, you do it similarly with whatever that DAW's import procedure is, and you also would be ready to go. So a pretty easy, non-painful way to get from GarageBand to Pro Tools or any other DAW in this modern landscape where we're sending stuff all over to each other and trying not to tear our hair out in the process. So that's it. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments below. And if you have any other things you'd like to see covered, let me know. Otherwise, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching and take care.